and Princes Parade sites. As you can hear, I'm not in the best of health, so I shall ask Andy Jarrett to lead on this.
The report is essentially in two parts. The first is a site options appraisal, which examines the sites, the best site for the new recreation centre. The second part of the report examines the viability of developing a new primary school and a new recreation centre at Princes Parade Hythe. Turning to the first, the options appraisal examined 5 sites. We had help from Lee Evans Partnership in preparing that. They prepared a master plan for each of the sites and a planning study to examine each of the options. The conclusion is that the preferred site location for the recreation centre is the green at Hythe. It's a central location, a flat site, and relatively unconstrained from a development perspective. However, the site is not owned by the District Council, it's owned by Hythe Town Council, and it's not yet known whether that council will support the proposal. If Hythe Town Council does not support the proposal, the report concludes that Princes Parade is the next best option. The second part of the report considers viability of the school and also the recreation centre. That work relies on 2 new studies that have been undertaken. The first, a value assessment by Savills, which looked at a number of sites which could be sold to provide capital to be invested into the school and into the recreation centre. It also relied on a geo-environmental assessment by Meerbrooks to examine the contamination at Princes Parade and the scope for and costs of remediation. The conclusion is that the school is not viable without a significant introduction of new capital from Kent County Council, and that the recreation centre is viable based on the inclusion of 36 low-density townhouses to be constructed at Princes Parade. The recommendations in full are set out before you, but essentially it's to invite Hythe Town Council to make land available at the green to enable the recreation centre to be constructed, to invite Kent County Council at their cost to resolve to construct a new primary school on Shepway District Council land at Princes Parade, and dependent on the conclusions of those invitations, for Shepway District Council to prepare a planning application for a comprehensive mixed-use redevelopment at Princes Parade, and the mix and extent of uses to be determined at a future meeting of Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Before we proceed, I would draw your attention to the resources and scrutiny minutes, especially number 18, which relates. Mr. Councillor James.
Thank you, Leader. As you mentioned the scrutiny committee, I thought I'd better inform you and the Cabinet that I did attend that scrutiny meeting purely as an observer. I didn't participate in any way at all, along with the 2 other Cabinet colleagues. And I think I would be charitable if I said that there was a certain amount of confusion in the committee of what could and what not could be discussed. In fact, the chairman of the committee at one stage had to explain to the committee exactly what they were discussing. The reason probably is because the report that they were discussing only came out 24 hours before the meeting took place, so they didn't really have much of a chance to read through it. In fact, I think one councillor said he hadn't actually seen the papers at all. So they rely very much on the presentation by the officer, but that's not particularly good because you don't have the in-depth knowledge by reading the report. The result of this was that the committee took, I consider, the easy option by saying, let's go and put it on the Martello Lakes. But that was by no means a unanimous vote on that. In fact, one member voted against the 2 of the state. So I'll just give you that as information, Leader.
Council, Ms. Carey.
Thank you, Chairman. I too was at Resources Committee and listened to the debate. I've also received emails. It's always a subject that provokes comment from members of the public. And I think it might be useful just to remind ourselves what we're actually doing here. We don't have to have a swimming pool at Hythe. We've taken the decision we would like to have one, and that the one, because the one that's there at the moment has a finite life, and there are significant difficulties in keeping it going where it is. We've looked at the options for the future of the swimming pool, because although you can easily build one, it's actually the running costs that are so crippling. And so the swimming pool we're looking at has other facilities such as a fitness suite and courts, and the long-term financial viability of the recreational facility, the enhanced Hythe pool, would be a better one. So we have to find room for that particular site, and we've got some options ahead of us. And I certainly welcome the fact that we're asking various partners for deadlines as to whether they're able to actually be partners on this or not. I think there has been some misunderstanding of the concept of value for money, and I would actually like to bring in our Section 151 officer, who is our financial referee, to actually explain what value for money means to us as a public sector body, and how we make our decisions. So if I may, Chairman, through you, Jo Miller, our finance officer.
Thank you, Chair. In looking at value for money, we have a microphone. Thank you. Yes, in looking at value for money in the public sector, we always use this to look at the options that we have. It's very important that we look at the three strands that we have in value for money, and these are economy, which relates to cost, efficiency, which is about the productivity, and most importantly, the effectiveness of the options that we choose. And this latter one is about meeting the Council's strategic objectives as they're set out in the corporate plan, and also bringing about outcomes for people. So when we're looking at value for money as a council, we're looking for the ultimate mix of the above, and we're looking to minimise cost, maximise efficiency and maximise effectiveness. And that is the key to looking at options, and we look at the financial and non-financial aspects of the options and take these into account. So that's a summary of value for money. Thank you, Chair.
So if I may carry on, I think that's very helpful, because it's not straightforward. This is the business case for each, and therefore it's a mathematical calculation, and we come to it at the end. It's something we have to make a judgment on, and there are a lot of people who are very firm about which option they prefer. I think they need to accept that when we look at this, we're weighing lots of things in our minds, and we might quite legitimately come to a different conclusion from them, but that doesn't mean it's not a value for money one. I think the other thing I would also like to make clear is, I think we have no option about Princes Parade being developed in some way or other. The fact that it is actually polluted, contaminated, I think is all the more reason that it should be addressed, and that we have an obligation to either put it into an ownership that can deal with that, or deal with it ourselves as part of one of our plans. So we see very frequently that there is development going on old petrol station sites with very similar levels of pollution to what, comparable pollution to what's been talked about on Princes Parade. So it's quite clear that sites are contaminated. They can be incredibly contaminated. There's one I'm thinking of in Folkestone that had an industrial use that we're looking to bring back into some productive use. And I think in terms of trying to secure Princes Parade in a way that's fitting, it's going to have to see some development in order to make sure that it can be decontaminated and that we can enhance the setting of the Royal Military Canal through there. And I think that whether we have a site that includes the school or doesn't include the school, there will be some development there, and it's not an option just to leave it as an old landfill site that has gone to scrap. So those were the points I wanted to make. I wanted to make it clear as well to everyone who sent me emails that I have read them carefully. I've also read the officers' reports, and I'd like to listen to further debate if my colleagues have anything they wish to say in terms of this report. Thank you.
Councillor Collier.
Yes, Leader. I'd just like to ask one or two questions. I mean, the first thing that occurs to me in reading this report is that the Council's Places and Policies local plan is still in the formative stage. And as I understand it, is not likely to be adopted until somewhere towards the end, perhaps, of 2017. What effect would that have on any application which may be submitted in the meantime in respect of Hythe Green or indeed Princes Parade? The second question I have is that there was some misunderstanding, I think, as to the number of properties, houses that may be constructed on Princes Parade. And I just seek confirmation that at this stage that number is restricted to 36. And the third thing is that I'd like to refer members to page 15. I'm slightly confused by the fact that in the opinion of Savills, a very respected national firm of chartered surveyors, so I would like to challenge their evaluations. But in actual fact, the figures in the report, and I can only assume that they've been transposed, they actually show a lower value for high density than for low density. That cannot possibly be the case, as I'm sure Pentland Homes would tell you, because any developer will always seek the highest possible density. So I would like some clarification as to whether those figures are based on 36 units. I think that they cannot be, but I would like to know the basis of those figures, and I'd like confirmation on that it is at this stage 36 units.
Thank you, Councillor Collier. Mr. Jarrett.
Yes, I think I can help with that point. I mean, normally what you would find is a developer is trying to increase density within a fixed plot of land in order to increase value. We're working almost in reverse in this situation where the limit is the number of houses. So the implication is that the lower density house actually creates more value, but it does require more land. I hope that makes sense.
Does that answer your question?
Well, it doesn't immediately make sense to me, no, because what we're saying is that the higher density has a higher value because it's spread over a larger area.
The lower density has a higher value because it's spread over a greater area. The house sizes would be bigger and the plot sizes would be bigger.
I don't want to pursue that, but I mean obviously it's not quite right because it's a lower density per acre or per hectare. But all I really saw was confirmation that these values were correct, the 4.47 million and the 2 to 3.46 million. And they're both based on 36 properties, and if the properties were to be constructed on a high density basis, they would be valued at, the value of the land would be 2 to 3.46, and on a low density basis 4.47.
Yes, that is right. You would, of course, be giving up more land for the higher value scenario.
Sorry if I confused you, Joe. I just saw clarification.
Councillor Love.
Thank you, Leader. I want to start just by commenting, and I have to say rather regretting the fact that one of the resolutions that we passed last May has been excised from the selective quotation which has been used both on page 8 and further on page 12. And I don't want it to be lost that we did actually say that we were looking for parklands. Now I know that that's the case because I put some words forward and you accepted them into the main resolution, Leader. And I think that, part of the confidence building that we carried out through the consultation exercise was around preserving that kind of open space feel about the site, whatever may happen. And I know that when the proposal that we were looking at last year may not end up being exactly the same one that finally takes place on the site. I know that you have to go back to the drawing board and look again. But I want to fly the flag for that parkland because I believe that is an essential part of any scheme. And I do believe that that's caused a degree of suspicion as members of the public have seen that that is not mentioned anymore. Now my understanding is that it is intended that that remains in there. I very much hope it does, and I will argue that case in due course. But I just, one of the difficulties that we have in sensitive issues like this is that the smallest slip, and I hope that's what it was, can give rise to suspicion. I'll be looking for some clarification over that, I hope from officers in a moment. Now, I'm not saying that the parkland element was the thing that was going to win over lots of people. And there will still be a number of people whose views I respect. I happen to disagree with them, but I respect their views, who will not find that the inclusion of parkland satisfies them. That's fair enough. We have different views, but we must ensure that we have as open means of communication as possible. I was also slightly surprised to see reference further on in the report at page 16, 4.5. This could include the creation of high-quality public open space. Again, I thought that was already agreed in principle, and I think that again is what's given rise to a degree of suspicion. The only other comment that I want to make before explaining where I stand on this is that I believe that at 310 on page 15, roughly in the middle of that paragraph, I think what it wants to say is the broad estimates suggest that it should be possible to construct a new recreation centre in Hythe rather than for Hythe at the Princes Parade site. The recreation centre is for all of Shepway, and it's for all of the visitors who come even from outside Shepway. And it may be seen as a pedantic point, and it's certainly less important than my previous one, but I do feel quite strongly about it. Where I see this report, Leader, is that we are seeking some clarification. And I think it's essential to have that clarification before we can go forward with any detail. We need to understand Kent County Council's current position over the school. We simply can't do any further modelling or analysis unless we have certainty over that. And it appears that there's been a change in the mood music surrounding that. We've never had a clear resolution. It's not to say we ever needed a clear resolution up till now, but now is the time that we do need a clear resolution. I think we also need some clarity over the very interesting suggestion put to our officers by people associated with Hythe Town Council about the use of the green. And without having that clarity, then it's difficult to proceed. And I think that that's why I support the move to seek clarity on that, and we need a deadline. We've actually got to do some work on that. I simply see the recommendations tonight as providing clarity and certainty, and also protecting our interests, making sure that we set the ball rolling depending on what that clarity and certainty brings. And providing I can get the sort of reassurance that I've asked for over the parkland element, then I'm very happy to support the recommendations. Indeed, they haven't even moved. I've put myself right in the firing line and move the recommendations on the basis that they will provide clarity and enable us then to make sensible judgments about the next way forward.
Councillor Peel. Mr. Chambers, could you?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Just on the parkland, the point raised by Councillor Love, absolutely correct, Councillor Love. It is a resolution which was passed in May 2014, remains a valid resolution of the Cabinet, should have been included, and there was absolutely no intention for it to be dropped off or missed out to mislead councillors or members of the public. And just for clarity for all members, Councillor Love suggested that the recommendations before you are for clarity and certainty. That's absolutely correct. They do not replace the resolutions that were passed by Cabinet last May. It's the view of officers that they complement those previous resolutions, and as Councillor Love quite rightly said, are there to get some form of certainty from our partners moving forwards.
Councillor Peel.
Yes, thank you. Yes, obviously I'm not going to be voting on this, so I do want to raise a number of issues. The first issue is that Councillor Love is quite correct in his recollection. I suggested a restricted covenant, he took it over. It was to be 36 houses and no more, parkland, and the potential development of a swimming pool on Princes Parade, if Princes Parade is selected as the option to deal with the swimming pool arrangement. And I do want to go on to say that although there are options with regard to, I don't know why, are you querying what I've just said? Yeah, all right. Although there are options with regard to Princes Parade, the Green, and of course Nichols Quarry, there is still other options there, including the South Road on the South Road recreation ground side. I discount the existing site, which I've always preferred, because it doesn't provide the swimming pool facility that we need for competition and for the 800 odd members of the swimming club and other people who will use it throughout the district, the world and the universe. So I would like, although I won't be making any proposals because I won't be doing any voting, that it also be asked of Hythe whether or not it has any view on the recreation ground. Similarly to Councillor Carey, I've had a number of emails raising concern, one concern being the question of the county's view as to provision of a school. The other concern being whether it has to be as large a facility as envisaged, being full badminton courts, dry sports, etc. And I take on board Councillor Carey's views about value for money. 150 houses, if we or the council opts for the Green or another venue for 150 houses for Princes Parade, is I think a red herring in respect of this particular report, and perhaps need not have been raised in any way, because I'm not considering that, and I will keep my powder dry in respect of any suggestion in that regard. There's no risk management, and this is a comment that's been made, there's no risk management concern about if there is a Princes Parade development rather than the Green, and I think that should have been addressed. And I know some people have said, well, Nichols Quarry, it's there, it's a development, they're going to be selling houses, but my understanding is that that is subject to a minimum number of houses being developed. It is not as accessible to the majority of people in the district, if you take the view that there's a number of people in Folkestone who might want to use the Hythe pool because it will be a new pool and have new facilities, and also Hythe itself. And I've always maintained my view that I prefer the existing site. If it's not the existing site, I would go along with Princes Parade if there was no alternative, and I said that I didn't regard Nichols Quarry as an alternative because it's so far in the future, and finance again is somewhat problematic in that regard. Mr. Martin, who sends very long emails, and what I always find really amusing is he says at the end, if you can get to this point, thank you very much. Well, you'll only know that he's thanking you for getting to that point when you get to that point. But I always do read, and I find it interesting that a professional person is making these comments. He's made the point that Merebrook Geo Environmental Assessment makes no mention of the school. He also points out that the South Road site, the one that is on the recreation ground, you could cope with the parking facilities by way of strip parking, so that there is a verge and you could provide facilities there, so that would reduce the amount of land taken at the South Road recreation ground, although I do accept that there would have to be consideration of all the other issues, and it may not prove a valid option, but it shouldn't be thrown out at the moment. And he also points out there are data gaps and things like that. I have spoken to other people in Hythe, and one comment about the Green is rather than have the facility, if it were to be decided to be in the Green, and I'm not making any suggestion that I favour it or not favour it at the moment, because I'm going to be a Hythe Town Councillor making a comment on that. People have suggested that rather than have it at the far side of the Green, that it would be brought forward to that part of the land where there is a pathway that runs from the Duke's Head through to the British Legion, which would have the benefit of being adjacent to major roads such as the 259 and State Street. It would have the fact that there are already services available, and that there is a car park at Portland Road car park and potentially else across the road that could be utilised towards providing car parking. And one of the problems I find with regard to a development like this is the number of spaces and land required for the facility of cars, and it almost dwarfs the development itself for a swimming pool than it does for the facility of providing somewhere for the cars to go. But that could be incorporated, and it could indeed, if you were charging to use that car park, benefit people in the residents of Hythe would get the car parking fees, and we all know the car parking fees that come in from across the road of the Aldi. So those are the points that have been made to me. I had a Mr. O'Callaghan approach me about the covenant, and no mention really in the debate today has been raised about the covenant. My view has always been, having read the papers back in 2001 when I was mayor of the town, that it is possible to apply to the Lands Tribunal to discharge that covenant to the extent that it prevents the provision of a building for sports facilities, and there are other ways of dealing with it, but it is obviously a criteria for the Green. So those are points that have been raised by other people, and points that I would raise are the exponential increase in the cost of making this site usable, from the original estimates of £500,000 to £2.5 million, and the question of whether you would wish to have a school on that kind of facility with parents being concerned about it. I think that obviously the points about the covenant with regard to 36 houses and the provision with regard to the open land, it's just a situation where there's been different personnel dealing with it, and I'm sure that it was not a deliberate aspect in putting that, or failing to put that aspect in there. My overall view, therefore, as a Hythe resident, bearing in mind the monies of the 106 are coming in respect of Hythe land, and that it is a facility that, although open to all, is available immediately to those who are resident in Hythe, that I want a facility in Hythe. I do not wish to lose the prospect of having a swimming pool. And therefore, my view, quite honestly, is look at the South Road position. If that is totally out, then I would take the view that either the Green or Princes Parade should be the preferred option. If it were the Green, and I want to listen to debate in Hythe as well, I would see a freehold retained by Hythe with a long lease of 125 years. I would suggest that one looks at the other position as well, suggested to me by other residents in Hythe, that instead of being in the far corner, and I understand why it was chosen because it's not a part of the Green.
Councillor Dearden, you aren't going to be able to do anything with what you're telling us about this, and you have told us all about it. Could you wrap up a little bit, do you think?
Well, I could, and I will, but I take the view that I'm representing... No, wait a minute, Leader. I am a representative for the central ward of Hythe in District.
But you are not sitting here as that representative. You are sitting here as a cabinet member of Shepway District Council.
I agree.
And can you therefore contain the business to that which is Shepway District Council's?
Which is Shepway District Council's business is the question of where you would take these recommendations. And the recommendations are twofold at the moment. I'm suggesting that there should be a threefold recommendation, and I'm suggesting that the alternatives on the Green should be considered. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Dearden. Can I now ask Councillor Mrs. Holmes?
Thank you, Leader. Well, I'm a Shepway District Councillor and I live at Sellinge, very close to Hythe, I suppose. Probably we'd have to choose between Hythe and Folkestone as far as the swimming pool goes. I would just like to say that I actually concur mostly with Councillor Carey and also with Councillor Love, apart from his pedantic twos or froms. And I think actually, I would like to say that I have again read all the emails and got to the report, the point of people saying thank you for actually getting to this point. And I understand how high the feelings are of a number of people. But I think we've actually taken on board two additional sites actually. People have come forward and said to us, would you please consider these sites? And actually, that's what we've done. So I think, you know, this is, we are at that position now. And I actually don't see these recommendations as anything controversial, except as Mr. Chambers says, and Andy Jammett, that they are actually clarifying and making certain this situation. It's just asking KCC to make up their mind really as to what they want to do about a new primary school, and it's asking Hythe to say whether they would consider using the green for a swimming pool. I take on board actually what Councillor Dearden said, and maybe we ought to be asking for their views on South Road, although from the options report it does seem that doesn't actually come into play. So I mean, I don't see that there is anything detrimental or anything controversial in this report. I just think that it's clarifying. We want to know. Myself and Susan Carey, we actually sat next to Roger Goff a few weeks ago, or a couple of weeks ago, I suppose it was now, and we said to him, do you want a school at Princes Parade? Do you want a new school for Seabrook? And he said, yes, our position hasn't changed. I know that's verbal, and I know that they haven't confirmed that in writing, and I think that's important. And I think that's important to actually ask for that in writing. So I'm very happy to go along with this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Hollinsby. Councillor Ewart Jones.
Yes, Leader. I also was very concerned that the word Parkland was mentioned in the report, but I now understand that it's still there, and the guarantee of having that kept in perpetuity by a covenant is still there, I understand. So I'm very happy with that. What worries me really is that if this project on Princes Parade that we're suggesting does not go ahead, then the music from the government is their number one priority is building houses. And I've a feeling that if we don't do something and the school and the swimming pool is not built and the parkland's not there, the government might come in and say, you have got to build houses there, and if you don't, we will do it for you. We will go directly to the developers and we will bypass you and we will bypass the planners. That is the music coming from the government at the moment. So I'm very concerned that if we lose this opportunity of putting the swimming pool on Princes Parade, we might end up with 150 odd houses. I'd also like to clarify something that Councillor Love mentioned, and also the scrutiny committee were confused about. And that was the fact that it wasn't a couple of people from Hythe suggesting to Shepway to look at the feasibility of putting the pool on the green. It came from the Hythe Town Council. The Hythe Town Council asked Shepway to look at the possibility of putting the swimming pool on the green. So that's where that comes from. The other thing is, of course, Nichols Quarry. We were promised a swimming pool in Nichols Quarry 8 years ago. And it didn't happen because there was a downturn in the economy and nothing happened. And the same can happen again. The minimum we could get a swimming pool in Nichols Quarry is 2020. That is if everything goes tickety-boo economy-wise. If the economy turns down and the house building turns down, you still won't get your swimming pool in 2020. So that's why I think that Nichols Quarry is out of the question.
Thank you for that. Councillor Love.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you for letting me come back. I stand fully corrected by my good colleague, Councillor Ewart James. I wasn't sure how formal a request that had been, and I thank him for hence my sort of hedging my bets slightly with the wording. I would also comment that my good friend, Councillor, the Deputy Leader, has actually has in fact concurred with my point about whether it's in Hythe or for Hythe, by admitting that from Sellinge she also wants the right to use it. So I think that is not just for Hythe. But the main point that I want to come back on, Leader, was a point that my colleague Councillor Dearden repeated twice, and the second time I felt I did need to pick it up. The covenant that we spoke about on Princes Parade was to protect the parkland. It did not refer to the housing. It was to protect the parkland. And I think there's been some misunderstanding, because I'm aware, certainly of one of the communications that I've received by email has also suggested that the covenant was about the number of houses, and it wasn't. And I'm not going to bore the meeting by reading the original recommendation that's in the minutes, not just in the recommendations. But everyone, I'm sure, will be able to read that. But it was, but I think it's an important point, because the other resolutions that we passed were about the housing and so on, while we were considering the kind of proposal that we were looking at last May. Now that full package is no longer available. We'll have to look again at that package. But the bit that I was particularly keen on protecting was the parkland, and that was the only element of it that was protected by the covenant, which actually I don't think we've introduced yet. We said that at an appropriate time there'll be such a legally binding covenant, and that's something that I just want to ensure it stays on the table as we go through the next 2 or 3 months while we seek clarity. Thank you, Leader.
Does anybody else wishes to speak on this? If not, I have a proposal to accept the recommendations from Councillor Love, seconded by Councillor Peel, but we won't take the vote until Councillor Dearden has accepted and Councillor Hewitt Jones has accepted.
Can we go to the microphone? You can go to the microphone.
Right, so as I say, the recommendations are to be moved by Councillor Love, seconded by Councillor Peel. All those in favour? That is unanimous, thank you. Would you like to return, councillors? The next item is events